Hi, Ava.
Hi, Maria.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Um, Excited to be here today and for us to have this marketing workshop. If everybody in the chat can just drop in where you're calling in from, dialing in from today, and maybe which plug and play program you're part of. Think that would be great start. Perfect. And anything else that you'd like to make sure we cover today, I appreciate. I know most of you have done the survey that Ava and I circulated earlier, a couple of months back. So thank you for that. I know most of you sounds like are also having a lot of the enterprise products that you're either building or selling already. So if you can drop in, if you're a direct to consumer enterprise or, SMB kind of B2B selling motion, that would be amazing. And then Ava, anything else before we get started? Let me pull up my screen.
No, I think Maria, it's up to you how you want to handle questions. If you want to do questions during or save all the questions for the end. But regardless, I think if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, maybe drop it in the chat.
Yeah, definitely drop it in the chat. And then also, you should be able to have in Zoom some of your controls where you're able to raise a hand. So if that happens as we're going along, just feel free to do so. And then we'll just make sure we cover everything that we're kind of going through today. So, all right, hopefully everyone can see my screen so far. Everything looking good. And then perfect. Why don't we just let's get going then. Perfect. Well, I think most of you already know this and I appreciate it, but we kind of talked through it already. Thanks for joining in. We're super excited to be here today. Been doing this together with Ava for about 2 years now, maybe going on 3. So it's been incredible to be part of the journey so far with Plug and Play across fintech, insurtech, health tech, and enterprise. So thanks for coming out, especially for those of you that are in Europe. I see we have quite a few that are based out of London, Madrid. I know it's getting a little bit later in the day for you, so appreciate you sticking around and joining us today. A little bit about me, I've been in marketing focus for quite some time, and all of the companies that I work for full-time have exited either via a merger or acquisition. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are things that I've either built myself and with some of the founders that I was a part of and those teams, or have scaled along the way in order to set us up for an exit. And after doing it about 6 times around, I figured I'll find a different hobby for now, which is being able to help a lot of various startups. And so today, what I do is I just run a marketing agency focused specifically on B2B early stage pre-series B tech startups and helping them sort of grow into their next step and their journey. So let's talk about some of the challenges for marketers. I think most of you know this already, but drop it in the chat and let me know if this resonates. Majority of the time, what I hear from founders often, especially in the B2B, especially in the enterprise space, is being able to grab some leads, right? It's really hard for most folks to find those leads along the way, and especially to make sure that they're high quality. Oftentimes what you get is a combination of quantity, but maybe as your sales team is calling along, they'll figure out it's not a good fit, it's not the right time, there's no buying cycle, and probably not even close to being a good opportunity or a great account for that matter for your services. And so even as the years sort of progress, the average close rate on those leads is quite small. And so as you're thinking about your marketing team, or as you're scaling and growing your marketing team, some of the things you have to keep in mind is, with the limited resources that you do have, how do you figure out where to invest in sort of the marketing channels, and how do you figure out which are the right ones for your motion, especially because what you do on the enterprise side be quite different than what you would do on the direct to consumer side or lower level S&P sales. So let's talk about a little bit about the cost of bad marketing. By the way, I think all of you probably have a sense about this, but I figured let's give the numbers out. And please drop in the chat and let me know if any of this resonates. you know, as we're thinking about hiring folks, by the way, these numbers are quite conservative nowadays with all of the remote work from home and a lot of the younger sort of generation opting out to have more flexible work environment. These costs have gone up significantly in terms of an average cost for a content writer or any sort of kind of tools that you may get. And so if you think about the cost of putting out the wrong content and sort of having the wrong team in place, it can get quite expensive quite quickly. Then you add on the cost of resources in terms of whether you have a marketing generalist in place, maybe you have two kind of earlier stage folks joining your team as a startup, or if you opt out and hire one senior executive, whether it's two or one, you're going to get into quite expensive sort of place in terms of how much you'll pay for them. And then you have to think about, well, what's all the bad revenue that I'm losing along the way? Because we have this team in place, they're doing something, but it's just not performing and not turning into anything fruitful for us. By the way, these numbers are quite low again, because if you're running an enterprise deal and enterprise sales, losing one deal for you might be well over 200K on average. And then what do you get? You get quite very few confidence and very low confidence in marketing in general, and the CEO and your head of marketing, if you have one, you're going to start to lose trust quite quickly. And all of those things, if we just add up on the very conservative side, I think these numbers are much higher today. You're looking at 4 to 6 months on average of runway time wasted just because of these sort of inefficient investments that you may have made along the way. So now let's think about, well, why is this so difficult? Well, if you think about it, in terms of being able to do great marketing, here are all the around 12 average, let's call them channels, if you will, or pillars, I'd like to call them, of marketing that any company should have at any given time. You need product marketing because without it, you might as well just spraying and praying in the dark. Because if you don't know the accounts that you're going after, you don't know the pain points that you're solving or how your product, you're able to articulate that accurately, clearly to your buyer personas, then irrespective of what's underneath the house, if you will, if the roof isn't solid and your foundation isn't solid, everything you do in the middle might as well be sort of a waste. And typically that happens quite often. Unfortunately, what I still see, especially here in the Bay Area, is that with a lot of early stage startups, they'll put some content out there, they'll have a website, they'll do a little bit of social, play around with some tools, not really knowing which ones to truly invest in. And then they're like, well, it's not working, 3 months in or 6 months in. And so one of the things that you have to be absolutely sort of certain about is understanding and spending time earlier in your development stage, thinking through the personas. And the personas just can't, try to be very focused. A lot of times folks are like, well, I'm targeting somebody in IT. Well, it's the CTO. Well, it's this person. Well, sometimes that's a little bit too broad. Or like with health tech, oftentimes what I hear, well, we need to get into the research coordinator. It's the director of the research coordinator or the CROs that I need to get into. Great. But how do those CROs buy? What they don't do is they don't spend enough time thinking through, well, how are those purchases decision made? Do they pick up the phone or are they spending time in the lab? If they're in the lab, they're probably not answering their emails. They're probably not joining a webinar anytime soon unless there's a compelling reason for them to do so. So you really have to do a lot of the work to try and understand how are your personas interacting, how are they finding and doing research into different available solutions in the marketplace. How are they then evaluating it, i.e., who do they go to? Do they go to their friends? Do they go to their buddies in their networks? Or do they go to the review sites like G2s and Gartners of the world? And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, as well as, the way that people are making purchasing decisions is quite different than what we're used to before. And therefore, aligning to that and getting ahead of that matters. And because it's the time that you spend kind of building reports and investing into channels that will ultimately, hopefully, convert for you. And so then you're trying to manage all of this in the middle, and you're kind of like, well, I'm just going to choose two. Everyone's doing events, so let me do events too. Well, events may not be the right sort of motion to prioritize, depending upon sort of the again, the buyers and influencers that are part of your journey, and also how they're like to absorb, learn, educate themselves, and also how do they build confidence in your solution. So really doing the due diligence upfront and understanding that really matters before you dive deep and start to figure out which of these channels you should try and invest some time in order to see if that converts to anything. The other thing I would say in terms of time and investing in these channels, if you're an enterprise company or you have an enterprise product that you're selling, if you think about your average sales cycle, it's going to be a lot longer than 3 months, typically. Oftentimes it's 12 to 18 months. What I see often is founders will try something with their heads of marketing or their existing team that they have right now. And after 3 months, if it doesn't work, whatever work means, by the way, that's also quite loose term that sometimes founders put on as a responsibility. Then they kind of say, okay, well, this didn't work, I'm not going to invest in it before. But you have to think about aligning your marketing to the longer duration of your sales journey is probably one of the better ways that you can then give it enough time to say something is working, or something isn't. And then in the base level of it all is you need a really good marketing tech stack in order to be able to measure, well, what does working truly mean? Is it that we're getting lots of leads? Okay, is that working for us? Is it that they're fewer, but they're high quality? Okay, well, what's high quality? Is it that they're taking first meeting with you, 3 meetings with you, or they're even open to having a conversation, or is high quality means something else for your organization? And so sitting through and thinking through that together from your sales hat, your marketing hat, really does and is truly important. Can't stress that enough before you sort of get going with some of the investments that you're doing or some of the campaigns that you might think about running in sort of these motions. And so for me, and I stress this quite a lot every time I connect with founders, is you have to be able to prioritize and align your marketing to your sales motion. And so if you're a direct to consumer, which I don't know if any of you dropped it in the chat, kind of like what kind of products and solutions you're selling. If you're enterprise, direct to consumer, kind of SMB focus, please drop it in the chat and see, and so that we can better sort of target the next phase of the conversation as well. But if you're direct to consumer, a lot of your marketing motion is going to be paid channels. You're not going to invest into a sales team. You probably won't have them. At best, they'll be customer success folks that are helping through potentially returns and some of the other things. But most consumer companies now are even figuring out a way to automate that process. And so it's a very yeah, thanks, Anthony. B2B enterprise, I appreciate it, from InsurTech. And so really a lot of them are no sales touch and quite all marketing. However, then if you're, yep, B2B SaaS here, perfect. B2B healthcare enterprise, great. Saudi, Deb, yep, perfect. Enterprise, good. See a lot of enterprise. And then if you're kind of talking through sales assistant, and what that means for me is sometimes you're going after SMB or you're going after mid-market. In terms of the volume of how you're generating interest and how those leads are typically arriving into your CRM pool or marketing automation platform, on the SMB side, majority of that is going to be marketing led and sales assisted, I would say. You find very few times that there are any sort of successful sales outbound motion on the SMB side, because the cost for investment into an AE rep that will do outbound on the SMB versus the dollar amount that you typically most companies charge for their products on that lower tier end is just, the ROI is just not there for it. And so what typically happens is a lot of the channels that we'll see on the SMB side overinvest into something that looks like paid, but just is assisted with sales along the way. Once we're going up tier into mid-market and also, by the way, enterprise, that motion changes drastically. And so it sounds like a lot of you here, whether you're InsurTech, healthcare, enterprise, most of you are enterprise type of products and solutions that you're offering to your customers. If you have to think about that journey, that is very different than everything that you see up until that point, because it's more sales led, right? You're now going to get, and when you target enterprise, most of the time you're targeting Fortune 500, Fortune, let's call them 1,000 companies, right? And so they're not going to buy, whoever is the decision maker of those companies, they're not going to buy off an ad that they see on Instagram. They're not going to buy off of an ad that they see on LinkedIn or on Facebook, or let's call it Outbrain or Taboola, any sort of like those third-party ad syndication sites. They're not going to buy off an ad, because oftentimes, especially I've seen somebody, Sati here, I think you're in cybersecurity, especially when you're offering products that are touching very sort of sensitive and mission critical components of the Fortune 1000 companies sort of structure and foundational level, it's going to be very difficult for them to buy off of these traditional, let's call them paid channel motions. And so what you have to think about is, then how does I turn what I'm doing on the marketing side that is supporting my sales efforts? And in that, because it's sales led, it's all about the partnerships, right? It's all about, how do I get into that account? Typically as a startup, I have very, lower brand recognition or no brand recognition in the marketplace than some of our bigger competitors. But I do have a unique and differentiated product, and I need to be able to get my foot into the door. One of the ways you do that is by building a lot of partnerships, whether you do them on the go-to-market side, on the sales side, with various incentives and other complementary companies that you can add on your products to, or potentially white label your products through, or you can do it on the marketing side with very low to no investment, except for employees' time, let's say, to build co-marketing partnerships. And now we're talking about a different way to break into an account without necessarily having to spend quite a lot of money on that end. So let's talk about, well, what does this mean specifically? I'll move through the SMB and mid-market a little bit faster, because most of you are enterprise, it seems like, so might not be as relevant to you. Let's talk about enterprise. That means you have to invest a lot of time into account-based marketing. You have to figure out, instead of an earlier conversation of a lot of high leads into my pool, maybe what I should think about is, what are the right target accounts? And so if you start your exercise with, instead of thinking about it, let's just get as many contacts in the door, let's identify who are my target accounts. Let's say it's, for the sake of the example, Fortune 1000 companies. Great. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pull a list of all those accounts and I'm going to add them into my CRM. Let's say you have one. Maybe you're using HubSpot. That's typically common. A lot of different folks at earlier stages might use other platform tools. Feel free to drop in the chat what you're using for your sales CRM and potentially email marketing, if you have that as well. But let's say on the CRM side, you're using HubSpot, typically common, and drop it in there. And so now you're thinking about, all right, I have my target list of accounts. I know to whom I'm going to sell to in terms of the accounts I need to break in the door. Now I need to start identifying people, because I need to start building relationships. And this is where that product marketing exercise we talked about earlier really does matter, because you're going to have an enterprise sales, on average, you're going to have about 20 or 30 folks at a single account potentially that you might have to touch at one point. Touch might be via email, touch might be via conversation, touch might be via connection on LinkedIn, touch might be via partner, and sort of, or an in-person event. Now that we're starting to get back into conferences, there's going to be a very large pool of people that you have to touch, and you have to be able to get a more crisp on what is the role of each one of those people within the layers of that organization. And then how are they involved in your decision-making process when it comes to the products or solutions that you're offering? Because you'll notice the value proposition that you might bring to someone who is an influencer is going to be very different than one to an actual decision maker, right? And let's say your decision maker, it's usually a head, a director, a VP, C-level executive. They're going to look at what's the risk of the solution, how quickly can we get it in the door, and what's the cost and replacement of either I'm replacing something that I already have, or I'm installing something new. So you have to tell me about the risks, and then you have to tell me about my upside and revenue potential. that message will be really great at that audience. And for that sort of decision maker, it will absolutely not resonate with an influencer because they don't care about that. They might be the person that's in the weeds that are dealing with that pain point of whatever you're solving for them, hopefully. And they're dealing with those issues every day, right? They're in the weeds. They might be the ones who are going to be using your tool. For them, it's a very different storyline and messaging that you should create. And so understanding who are those different personas, which role do they play, and what is the lead value messaging that you have to deliver to them through various channels. Some of them are going to be your salespeople, some are going to be these partnerships, some are going to be this account-based marketing that you might do, or some thought leadership exercises that you do. How do you lead with those messagings over a long period of time? Because remember, if you're on the enterprise side, you have to hit them with that message throughout at least 6 to 10 month window period until you start to see that evolving into some sort of sales potential or a deal. You might say, okay, great, Mariya, but that's too long. Yeah, but if you're having an enterprise product or solution you're selling, it's always going to be a little bit too long as well. Yep, Anthony dropped in the chat around the industry awards, case study surveys. Yep, exactly. So for thought leadership, perfect. I think that's exactly it. It's a different there are different things you can do for thought leadership. A lot of it is always content led, and so you have to be able to tell a unique story. And then we yep, Deb, we're going to get to you. Give me 1 second. And on that unique story, you have to be able to say, what is my unique and differentiated perspective that is not available in the market today on XYZ topic? That's where I find most folks struggle with thought leadership, because if you get that piece right and that piece is applicable to any of the layers of the organization that we just talked through, that's going to resonate right away, irrespective of where you promote it, how you promote it, whether you pay for promotion or not, email blast it or not. It's going to resonate because folks are interested in unique content topics. And if you're going to go with, here are the 10 trends that I see in this enterprise SaaS space in the next 10 years, that's just going to sound like vanilla messaging that they've seen already from bigger brands and a lot of probably competitors in the space. That doesn't really resonate as much. I'm going to pause because I know we have a question from Deb. Deb, you have your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and, go off mute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, this is Deb. Yeah. In terms of content, right? Like once you talked about the personas, and let's say we have a combination of multiple decision makers and influencers to and then have to finally find a champion, and we've identified those various personas and how to get there. Can you speak a little bit about you're talking about content and sharing perhaps our viewpoint or philosophy or approach or secret sauce, whatever it is. How do you propose really doing that? Is that just during the call, where I've had like heads nodding, but how do you sort of what are the different modalities through which you can convey this unique point of view to the decision maker? And then secondly, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but do you have any numbers to share in terms of, let's say for a B2B sale, it takes 9 months. How many sort of leads, like the lead gen pipeline, per month?
Yeah.
Do you have I know it's going to vary by industry, but do you have a sense about like how to think about it? And we're early stage, so we're just starting to talk to B2B.
Yeah, perfect. Let's see if I can cover some of your questions on how to convey, and great questions, by the way, on how to convey the messaging to those decision makers. There's a couple of different ways that I would recommend, because you're going to have a lot of different touch points throughout the process. One, ideally, you'd like to identify someone within your company who can be a thought leader. And over time, as you expand and grow, there might be different people. So what I typically see happens, especially if you have some sort of technology product that you're selling on the B2B enterprise side, it's either your chief product officer or head of product or your CTO. because they're probably the ones that are building the product and they have some unique differentiated point of view that they're helping you to bring the technology to place. And so they might be a really good thought leader to promote and to get ideas from. So you ask, how do you convey it? First, you have to figure out where do you find the ideas and who within your organization has them. The second question becomes, how do you articulate them in a way that the market understands? Because what I often find is the way internal folks at the company tend to think about what's different and unique, and the way that I articulate it in the way that resonates for them. The challenge often becomes in the delta to sort of bridge the gap against is the way that their target audience thinks about it or likes to receive that information might be quite different. And so oftentimes what happens is CTOs are like, well, I'm saying this. Like I've been, saying this and making noise about this for the last 9 months and nothing's happening, because that means the way you're communicating that it's not landing on the other side. So I do think it's important to think about the messaging and how do you truly get that point across. The best way to figure out if it's working or not before you start trying it on your customers, and you can try it on the prospect that you have in the pipeline. You can also try it within your investor community that you might have access to. I know with Plug and Play, there's also quite a lot of resources on the end of the accelerator where they might have your target audience available from whom you can pitch those ideas to and truly understand if the message resonates. Messaging not resonating is one of the also challenges that I see across the board for all startups. And then how do you continue to convey it? So lots of different channels. One, on the thought leadership side, have a consistent cadence, like a content calendar, editorial calendar of the different blog posts or short articles that your thought leader can post, and someone helps you kind of develop them along the way. And it's crisp, precise, unique, and differentiated, and there's some sort of an opportunity for a call to action. You can promote that, let's say you post it on your website, you can promote that on email, you can make that into a webinar topic, you can ask for PR and get also, as you're thinking about attending events, anytime you guys attend events, I highly recommend that you also, there's always a speaker proposal window that is available for all these conferences. And if you're paying to attend, you might as well submit those speaker proposals, because if you can clearly and crisply articulate the value add, it's going to become important. And then last, and you mentioned this already, Deb, but also in those meetings and in those sales conversations, absolutely. Now, the very first one that your AE does, or, as founders, you might be, depending on how early some of you are, you might be the AE and the head of sales for your company too. And so trust me, I understand. And so you might not get to it on your first call, but most of the time folks ask for a follow-up call in this enterprise journey. And most of the time folks are showing decks, or then they get in front of those decision makers face to face. Once the sales process starts progressing, that's where you want to really sort of hit home that differentiated point of view and land with some of those decision makers that you've identified and champions at those companies. And remember, it's going to be a little different for each one of them. And so make sure that you tailor the messaging. So that's for the sake of time, I'll move on to your second point, which is the number of leads to have in the pipeline. So, and it's not really that it depends by industry. It also depends on really your conversion and your pipeline coverage. Typically what I see, most companies, if you have a 20% close rate, right? So let's say that means out of $1 million in pipeline that you put into your pipeline, which from stage 1 to however many stages you have, let's say you have 5, that means only 20% of that 1 million close one, assuming that you've been able to already successfully take something through the process end to end. So if 20% close one, and you know what your sales target is for the year, it's 200K out of 1 million pipeline, then you have to think about, okay, well, if my sales target for the year is 1 million and I have a 20% close rate, that means times 5, I need to have 5 million pipeline coverage in any given sort of cycle. Your sales cycle, it depends on your window. Let's call it 10 to 12 months. And then your question was how many leads? Well, take that pipeline coverage of 5 million divided by your average deal size, whatever that might be for you. That should be amount of total leads that you need for that set period of time in order to get you to your sales target and your sales goal for the year. And then what you have to do is you have to adjust that for seasonality. But in terms of rough math, that's how I would think about it. I would start with your end number and your sales target, I would think about your win rates and do pipeline coverage. And that means that's the active amount of pipeline that you should have in any given time. During that duration of your cycle, I would divide your then pipeline coverage number by the average deal size, and that'll give you your total leads that you need. And then you have to sort of think through how many of them can you do at each given month, understanding that February's are always quite bad for leads most of the time. It's one of the shorter months. Summertime is also quite slow for lead generation. So there is seasonality in sort of our calendar year for us to account to as well. But great question, Deb. Keep them coming, and anyone else, feel free to drop some in the chat as well. And so as we think about some of these sort of strategies, here would be some of my advice for something for you to consider. You might be doing some of this already, and if you are, please drop it in the chat. If you have any experience or point of view on, yes, we've tried working, not working, this tool, that tool, drop it in the chat as well. But I would say in general, across all industries, be able to, once you get the content stories in place, to promote that via email. It's still right now, dollar for dollar, the most highest ROI channel in marketing to date. And that's been true across all industries. And so typically the reasoning for that is because it's a very low investment outside of the technology costs that you have to pay. So like for a MailChimp or HubSpot is usually, again, earlier stage startups typically start there, and then they grow into and they graduate into platforms like Parda, like Marketo over time when they have the investment. But it's one of the easiest way to sort of consistently have a predictable cadence of content and messages delivered to your target accounts and those target buyers within those accounts. But remember, for this to be effective, it's like, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have bad accounts, wrong accounts, not your buyer persona accounts, or contacts in the email automation tool, whatever you send them is not going to be as effective. And so you have to always think about, it's better to have fewer things in there that are the right accounts for all of you, especially on the enterprise side, and the right contacts versus just a blanket pool of leads that may not turn to anywhere. And by the way, like also best practices, like on your website, there is a way to make sure that any form submittals don't have a personal email account. Like start doing that now. Make sure you don't have Gmails and Yahoos in your database, especially on the enterprise side, because you're probably not going to have, you're going to look at your numbers and you're going to look at your performance and you're going to realize the leads are not converting. So there are some best practices there that you can implement to make sure that you have the most opportunity to be effective. The second thing that we just talked about, also very low to really kind of no investment there when you talk about different tools and sort of ongoing monthly costs, is really content and SEO. On the enterprise side, I would highly recommend thinking through what is my unique and differentiated point of view, either on the space, on this market, on this technology functionality, on what the future functionality needs might be of my audience that is unique and different than what everyone kind of talks about in the space. Like I'll give you a direct example. For me, I've been kind of talking about aligning marketing to sales pretty much my entire career. And I've seen it work when that's done at companies that I've been a part of, or just startups that I've been, had the pleasure to observe. Or I've seen it not work when everyone just takes a very sort of broad and generic approach. And that's an angle that I talk about all the time. That's unique, that's differentiated, because if you look at all the marketers, they're kind of not talking about that. They're like, oh yeah, you should do a little bit of this. Oh yeah, make sure you have this tool, that tool, this tool, that tool, paid marketing. It's great. But when you're enterprise, it doesn't mean that all of that is applicable. So see, you have to be able to find like, what is my unique perspective, either on this market that I'll continue to sort of champion myself as like a thought and within my organization. And then I'll invest into being able to have a consistent, predictable set of storylines that is applicable to all the various decision makers at my companies that I'm going after over a set period of time. So really thinking through, what does that editorial calendar look like? To whom is it speaking to? Is it the influencers? Is it the end decision makers? For example, a lot of folks like to do an ROI calculator. Sure, that might be an interesting way to captivate somebody from the org. But you have to think about, will the CTO go on my website and play with that? Or is that more to the influencers within that account? Or is that for the purchasing, folks in that account? You have to think through who is actually going to engage with some of the content and the tools that you're building. The other thing I would say is as SEO matters as well, because that's one of the easier ways. If you can think through how to articulate and position your content, SEO is only going to help you be able to hopefully be more searchable. Folks can find you faster if they're looking for that specific point of view that they need to be solved, or the pain point that they're looking for. So, be able to search SEO terms that are relevant for your industries. That's a kind of couple of hours a week here of work, and then someone can maintain that if you have someone ongoing at the company. The other thing I talk about a lot, especially for early stage startups, are co-marketing partnerships. So find somebody who is non-competitive in the space that you're in. So let's say you're doing HR leadership and development programs. I know none of you are doing that, but let's say that's the example. And so a people operations and HR onboarding tool, it's not a direct competitor, but let's say you find someone like Gladys who has a phenomenal brand name in the marketplace, really big brand recognition, and you do a co-marketing partnership with them. If you can sort of get your foot into the door, now that becomes interesting, because I would imagine Lattice and their amounts of webinars that they're doing on a monthly basis, couple of webinars here and there, they also have quite a lot of traffic on their website that comes through. So even if you do a co-marketing blog post together, it's going to get you the eyes, it's going to get you people coming back to your website. And so think about it from that perspective for your industry and your specific product. There might be, and think through who can be almost create a hit list instead of sales and try to get the prospects hit list. This could be a co-marketing partnership hit list, and you'll have non-competitive brands identified in the space. And then you can do the same tactics of finding them on LinkedIn. If you're attending similar conferences together, you can connect with those folks from those marketing departments, because they are always looking for ways to get, let's say, probably more leads in front of new people. And so are you. And for a co-marketing partnership, let's say you do a webinar, it could be zero cost to both parties involved with a typical structure. And then what you can sort of agree to is both are co-promoting it, and both will share lead lists at the end of the webinar. That becomes interesting, because now for $0, except for someone's time that you have at your company, if you're successful at building something like this together with a bigger brand, you're getting more brand awareness, more reach in front of more people. And if you, as someone in your company, can be the speaker, then you have an opportunity to really showcase that thought leadership, get in front of the right audience, because they're probably also talking to your target audience. So in that same example, leadership and development services, you probably sell them to heads of HR, directors of HR, CHROs. Great. Lattice people operations platform, selling it to also CHROs, same target audience attends. So you got the right people in the room. If you're enterprise, you have to make sure that your co-marketing partnerships are going to the right accounts as well. And now you're able to increase your reach, get in front of the right folks, and be able to grab those leads as well. So I would highly recommend folks think about co-marketing partnerships, especially at this early stage. I can't tell you how many companies and startups I've been a part of that have deployed this tactic successfully and have seen their lead list grow of high quality, engaged contacts that are within their buying persona and target audience for $0. They don't have to pay Zoom info thousands of dollars. They don't have to pay someone to scrub lists and do cold outreach. It's a warm, engaged outreach, and it's definitely worth the investment. Ben asked a great question. When you're reaching out to potential co-marketing partnerships, what could be some of the things that you offer to them in return? Yeah, so typically what I've seen done really well is sometimes they're looking for speakers on a unique topic. So if you have content ideas and topic ideas that are applicable and relevant to their space, they're oftentimes interested in that. Because if you think about it, at this point, they're so big that, or they're bigger and they have a rhythm, right? They have some sort of predictability in how they're doing their process. What's different is they might not have the most coolest, unique sort of content. So they're always looking for content ideas. Another thing that I see people often offer are those free promotion, right? And when I say free is by partnering together, I'm going to give, I'm going to go promote this to my network of companies I know and prospects and my own customers and my investor community, etc. So I'm going to get you in front of more people, and I'm going to do free promotion for this activity that we decided on together. So if it's a white paper, we're going to promote it, you're going to promote it. And if we're going to gate it, I'm going to get you my leads. They're going to come from my website. You're going to give me your leads. Lead swapping is the number one thing that usually people offer as well. And that tends to go a long way, because even for them, it's the more that they can get the contact acquisition, right, play. So the more they can have contacts coming into their database that you have access to that they may not, and the more that they can continue to grow their database, which for you is probably also a number one priority, that tends to be a win-win all the time. So whether it's something like sometimes and I know that when we did the survey, I believe some of you mentioned that you're spending 1 to 5K on marketing per month. I'm assuming that's not people cost, and that's costs on different sort of marketing campaigns. If that's true, what I would also suggest you might want to offer is splitting the cost of something. So let's say they're going into an event, or they want to do some sort of a marketing campaign play that has a cost to it. You could have a sort of discussion around subsidizing some of the cost and splitting that, depending upon, again, how big they are or how much they could be, bigger than you, but not as big as, let's say, my lattice example. They might still care about that. But I would say the number one thing you can absolutely offer are leads. I've always, even if that's the only thing you offer, and some free speakers on their events or free content that you can help write for them, do some of their work, that always goes a long way. But leads is number one. And then the last thing I would definitely stress are this concept of communities. And so if you think about, especially if you're in a tech world, which I know most of you are, like cybersecurity, I've seen insurtech, a few other things. Think about platforms like Discord. Think about platforms like Reddit. Think about those types of communities. Even Slack communities, right? There are a lot of companies that are just creating specific Slack communities as channels, inviting a lot of their, how they grow them? They just invite they start with their friends first, investors first, accelerator first, and then they go to their LinkedIn, and literally they'll take the Slack channel, and like a salesperson on LinkedIn would do an in-mail to prospects, they take that play and run it to either their network or some of the other personas that they think would be the right types of audiences into their Slack community. Now, the difficult part with communities is, like with content, like with blogs, like with anything marketing related, you need to have a consistent, ongoing, predictable thing of content that you offer, or some sort of engagement. What tends to work with Discord and Reddit, right? It's typically you have quite a lot of tech-focused, specialized individuals that can continue the conversation, and they're naturally engaged. Like, imagine the developer communities, right? They're naturally engaged because they're interested in those technologies and going back and forth and sort of debating those topics. Slack, it's kind of harder to get that level of engagement, but it also depends on your audience. Like, I've seen HR companies and marketing companies, sales companies be really successful on Slack, but you have to understand, like, that audience, it's more of the they like the community aspect, they like the networking, they like to engage and shoot the shit here and there, right? Like, that's a very different persona. And let's say if you're going after CTOs and developer profiles, they don't really care about that piece as much. What they care about is what do you have to offer, how smart you are, and can we really have a debate on this technical topic that I'm super passionate about? And so you have to find the right community. But if you have the time and resources as someone on your team to stand this up, to continuously engage and drive engagement and invite people in and give them something, that tends to work pretty well as well. I'm going to pause right here. I know we have Nick that raised a hand, and go ahead, Nick, if you'd like to maybe introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thanks very much. Yeah, my name's Nick Lilovich. I'm with the Collaboratory. We're selling into pharma, mid-size at first, selling information aggregation technology, basically an enterprise search engine. And my question is about engaging with these online communities. I have done some preliminary tests, and there is a strong anti-shilling bias I don't know if you've ever observed that. They'll just ban you. And I'm curious how you work within those traditions to still have earnest conversations about something that you are in fact selling. I'll pause there.
Yeah. No, great point. And by the way, some of those are also on LinkedIn as well. What you'll find is as quite similar to what you described. I think it's the way that you tend to engage. So the kind of two thoughts. One is the way that you tend to engage. I've seen on LinkedIn something similar happens when a lot of folks tend to like promote their products a lot, or promote that next webinar that they're doing, and promote. And oftentimes those communities kind of have to, like, if you're joining versus starting one, if you're just joining an existing one, I would recommend just observe kind of the dialogue and sort of the engagement process that happens there. What I've seen work is most folks approach it from a lens of less talking about themselves and their company or the products that they're building, but more so talking about like whatever is actively going on and the conversation. So you kind of dive into the existing conversations. And once that develops over time and you kind of build your brand reputation a little bit within an existing community, then I think folks would be more interested in, oh, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. Or if you say, hey, I saw this cool article online, etc., folks will be more interested, less likely to sort of ban you from some of those engagements. I would say but on the topic of communities, what could also be interesting if you have the time and resources, considering starting one, or even like the LinkedIn group, considering starting one and sort of building that network and inviting folks in, because then you can kind of control the narrative and sort of the roles are a little bit flipped in terms of who's banning whom and kind of how the content is controlled within that. And so that would be something that I would think about as well as starting your own along the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cool. I just want to make sure that we have a bit more time. And this is something I just want to flash for all of you. You might already have some of these tools, not to say that this is the end all be all stack. The stack is going to be very different for all of you, depending upon sort of what your needs are, where you are in your stage and sort of funding, honestly, in the runway you might have. But I would start thinking about, right, what website, what are you using for that? Webflow is quite popular to date. Most companies are shifting into that platform. I've seen quite a lot, especially in the startup space, lots of functionality, code free. A marketer or someone just out of college can definitely use that. Highly recommended. Webflow. You need some sort of CRM marketing automation tool. HubSpot is usually the choice for most startups. And accelerators have different sometimes structures that allow you to take advantage of sort of the tools at a lower cost than the most. And then you have to think about, all right, what else do I need? And so if I'm doing prospecting and outbounding, if I'm at a place where I have enough kind of funding available, I might consider a tool like Outreach or for your sales team in order to send some of those personalized emails. And so I want to pause. I know Shabam has a question around sales navigation and LinkedIn B2B marketing. What's the right way to make the first contact with our messaging? Should our messaging be about the product, everything about it, generic info, call to action? Yeah, in terms of LinkedIn outreach and sales navigator, what I would say is there's a lot of people on LinkedIn that are receiving messages, much like probably what your salesperson is trying to send them. Either they are promotional messages, which happens all the time. Hey, here's what I do. Here's my product. Here's this, that. Or it could be like, hey, here's this event. Here's the webinar, etc. Most of the time, what I've seen, especially at higher level decision makers like your directors, your VPs, your heads of companies at bigger companies, they typically don't respond to that. They automatically delete them, mark them as spam, and kind of move on. Where it still, I believe, has a bit more of a play in terms of outreach and starting to build that rapport is with influencers. Because again, influencers, they're typically mid-level within the organization. They typically do have that pain point. And if you can't show them a cool tool or a way to solve that pain point, that might be something that they'll respond to. I wouldn't expect that you'll get respond from any sort of higher level VPs, directors, especially a larger organization through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. What I would recommend potentially thinking about is using that tool to either validate the prospects that you do have in your database, like, hey, is Mariya still alive? Is she still working at this company? Is this still her title, or has she moved on to a different organization? Think about it more as like contact validation tool in order to make sure, or contact building tool, right? You can say, okay, I know Mariya is this persona, works at this company, I'm going to try to, I definitely need her in my database. It's good for that. Think about it as contact building. I would say if you want to try and bridge that gap and have the cold outreach through Sales Navigator to try to convert them into something, I would say you'll have more success with mid-level, kind of like entry-level influencers versus the decision makers. I would offer them a tool or something unique that can give them an opportunity to see how the product works, or a unique sort of case study, maybe, if that's interesting for them, assuming that they have that pain point. For the higher level folks, I wouldn't expect a response, and honestly, I wouldn't even try, because sometimes it puts the worst taste in their mouth with regards to your company. It might have more of an adverse effect than what you're looking to achieve. And so as you're kind of thinking about your journey here and thinking about kind of looking forward into building out your marketing capabilities and sort of making sure that that translates into something repeatable on the sales side, I would highly recommend definitely align and prioritize the channels that are applicable to your sales journey. If you're going more of the SMB route, definitely invest more into your website, driving traffic to the website, the SEO piece of it, and sort of any kind of partnerships or other ways you can get more hits onto your website, and usually have opportunities for folks to convert via chats, via specific content, maybe pieces that you have, etc. Then you have to make sure you put them somewhere. So you have to have your database, your platform, that CRM tool, email tool, so that you can store them, update them, monitor them, and use tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator potentially to validate that those are still the right folks at those companies that you should be going after, and have a consistent cadence of messages that you send out to them. And then obviously make trade-offs along the way. And I think most of you as founders already know this, so don't have to kind of spend too much time on that, but you can't do it all. That chart we saw of 12 different things that any marketing team should have, you'll build towards that. But in the beginning, really identify the things that matter for your journey and stick with it. Like on the enterprise side, you're going to be doing account-based marketing, whether you want to or not. Like get in front of that and do that well. You can still do the email piece, right? You can still do these channel level webinars and events, but who your accounts are. Focus on getting them and the right influencers and decision makers from those accounts into your database, because then create the right storylines and contents and messages, because then once you start doing that repeatable, consistent cadence, you'll see that naturally go into some sort of engagement for you and for your company. And those would be sort of some of the things that I would say I would like for all of you to keep in mind today, and as we're walking away from the workshop. So I know we have about 6 minutes before our time is up. I'd like to, of course, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Would love to have this opportunity to help and answer anything that might be top of mind for you. Otherwise, feel free to drop things in the chat as well if you prefer. Either one works for us. Hopefully this was useful for your time today. Thank you again for everybody who's on in Europe for standing up a little bit later and sticking around with us. We definitely appreciate it. Thanks, Nick.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any last questions?
Yep. Thanks, Sonia. Yep. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everyone.
Seriously, this is awesome stuff. It's going to save me a lot of wasted effort.
Thank you. Yes. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Olivier, Kelvin, Siobhan, Heiko. Thanks, everyone. Yep. Either one works. Yep. Feel free to contact me, connect if you'd like to chat more. I also offer some office hours through Plug and Play, by the way, before all of you start dropping off. So if you'd like to connect, Ava can definitely arrange that, and happy to do a complimentary 30 minutes together and talk through some of the specifics for you and your company if needed. So Ava is very gracious and has facilitated those in the past. So please let her know.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me, or feel free to reach out to your program managers. Happy to connect you to Mariya, whether it be a one-off meeting or through an office hours.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mariya.
Thank you. Thanks, Ava.
Take care. See you all.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.